Hey guys, Buildzoid here with another PCB overview video for you. Today we're going to be taking a look at the R9-295X2. This is quite possibly the most complicated PCB no, it's definitely the most complicated PCB I've done so far, and it's quite possibly going to be the most complicated PCB I will ever do. So let's take a look at this. Now, word of warning here, I cannot identify all of the VRMs here. Okay, core voltage is easy because that one always has the most phases, but memory, auxiliary, and 0.95 volts are a mess unless I have unless I have the card in hand and can actually use a digital multimeter to identify them all. And 0.95 volts would actually be super easy if it weren't for the fact that there's three identical VRMs on here, and there really shouldn't be three of anything. There should only ever be two or one of stuff. So that causes a lot of confusion, and I'll explain why there should be only two or one of stuff. Well, right now actually. So when you're doing a dual GPU card, you need to provide every single voltage for every single GPU individually, for efficiency reasons as well as all kinds of It's basically it's important to do it that way. Because without that, you don't have ultra low power state. Your boot up is a bit of a mess. And overall, you just need an individual VRM per GPU. So basically, here we have 4 VRMs per GPU core, because the 290X requires 4 voltages to run, and this is essentially two 290Xs on one PCB. And then there's obviously an extra VRM to feed the PLX chip, which is right here, and then there's one extra VRM floating around on this PCB that I have no idea why it's there. I suspect it's also for the PLX chip, but I can't find any proof that a PLX chip needs an extra voltage. So let's go over the voltages that each of these GPUs needs. You need a core voltage. You need a memory voltage to feed all the GDDR5. You need an auxiliary voltage to basically do stuff with the GPU. Not a really very useful voltage. It's necessary for the GPU to work. Obviously, it's not very useful when overclocking, and it's a quick way to kill your card if you raise it really high. From what I understand, it's related to something in the memory controller, or it's a PL or some kind of frequency stuff. And then finally, you got your 0.95 volt rail, which takes care of display stuff. And the 0.95 volt rail is again not very useful on the 295X2. Like in terms of overclocking, there's no reason why you should play with it, because you need it on LN2 because it helps with black screen issues and stuff, and you need it when pushing really high core voltage because it helps with black screen issues resulting from really high core voltage. Why is it not important on the 295X2? Because you really shouldn't be pushing a whole lot of core voltage on this card, because this VRM is not, like, it's still really strong. It's not quite there yet for over 1.4 volts though. I really wouldn't push it that far. So let's go over the actual VRMs we have here. The PLX chip is fed by this right here. And then we have the 0.95 volt voltage VRMs, which is one over here, and then there's one over here. And this is the confusing one where it's like, I can't figure out why there's 3 of this VRM. So 2 of these are certainly 0.95 volt, and they certainly help the GPU with their display stuff. This one is definitely for this GPU. This and this, I have no idea which does which. I suspect one of them is for the PLX chip because there's nothing else on the GPU that could possibly need its own voltage supply. That would be necessary, just one of it. And there's 3 of these here, so obviously one of these should be for the PLX chip. I don't know which one it is. I need to measure with a multimeter to make sure. So yeah, and since I don't have the card, I can't do that. So let's keep moving. Let's take care of the core voltages. Core voltage is over here, and it's a 4-phase VRM. And this one obviously feeds this GPU and then there's a mirrored version right here. And I missed one of the high side FETs on one of them, so like that. And this is actually still part of this core voltage, so that's a little mistake I made. So yeah, those are your core voltages. They're both 4 phases. And there's one for each GPU. They're controlled by the NCPA 81022 voltage controller. One of those is located on this side of the PCB, the other one's located on the reverse side of the PCB. I will only give you the pins to check on this side, and then you can obviously just use the same picture on the reverse side, because these things are oriented, they have an orientation dot, so it's not really hard to figure out which pins it is on each. You will have to trace them out yourself, because again, I don't have the card, so I don't know what they actually hook up to component-wise. And as always, just trace them out and solder onto something that you feel confident about soldering onto. Though I do believe the 295X2 has full voltage, full voltage control in software, so you really shouldn't be needing to mod this for anything other than memory voltage. And I'm not even sure if the NCP 8122 actually does memory voltage, because I don't have the card. So let's get on to the memory voltage and the auxiliary voltage, which again, I don't know which one is which, because I don't have the card and I can't check which one's making which voltage. So this one in green up here could very well be auxiliary. I personally think it's auxiliary because it's a higher inductance inductor than the other single phase VRM located on the GPU, which is over here and also mirrored all the way over here. So yeah, and I'm saying the green ones are auxiliary because they're higher inductance, and usually if you have a higher inductance inductor, they'll be lower current throughput just because of how they need to be wired compared to the lower inductance one. So yeah, so the blue ones are probably memory voltage and the green ones are probably auxiliary, but without measuring, I don't know. You can obviously go and measure this yourself. If one of them is reading 1.5 volts or 1.35 volts, then that's your memory one. There's a low power version of GDDR5, so that would be the one running on 1.35 volts. And auxiliary should be producing around a volt or 1.05 or 0.95, one of those three voltages. I'm not entirely sure. It's been ages since I've last handled a Hawaii card. I think it's just straight 1 volt. So yeah, that covers that. So power throughput wise, what are we looking at here? So core voltage on this is 4 phases, which is why I said this is not a great card for doing super like high core voltages, because a 290X has a 5 phase. This is a 4 phase built of the exact same components that you would find on a 290X. So the low side FET is a 6894 from International Rectifier, and the high side FET is a 6811, again from International Rectifier. The low side is rated to do 70 amps continuous drain current, and the high side is rated to do 32 amps continuous drain current. But obviously the high side doesn't spend most of its time being actually, turned on, and the high side can do a burst current of around 70 amps at 125 degrees and around 150 amps at 25 degrees. The spec sheet doesn't actually specify burst current at 125 degrees, only at 25 degrees. So, the burst current at high temperature is sort of estimated based on how the continuous current scales. So basically that means you really don't want to push this VRM too hard, because the high side FETs on this are taking about 20, they're under 20% more load than they would be on a 290X. And the 290X is already, like you can already burn out the high side on a 290X if you push it too hard. So this will burn out sooner. And that's even though this has a relatively smart NCP 81022 voltage controller, which is actually similar in its feature set to the 3564B from International Rectifier. It does include per phase current sensing and all of that. I'm not entirely sure if it does the current balancing quite as quickly, but it is still a very smart voltage controller. And thankfully the datasheet for it just went public. So if you have a 260X or a 380 or a 380X or anything, you can just check that datasheet and it'll give you the pinouts. And I'll actually drop that datasheet down in the description below the video. But of course, I'll also show you how to do some of the basic mods directly here with the pinouts. So yeah, so current wise, you're looking at around 280 amps current throughput on like total current, but I wouldn't actually push it that close to the limit for, well, just because of how the VRM is laid out. This whole area right here is just a giant hot spot. So it'll get really, really hot really easily because, that's where all your MOSFETs are and they dump the majority of your heat in a VRM. They produce most of the heat, and so that'll just get really hot. So it's going to be really hard to cool. And as they derate with higher temperatures, well, you're going to be pushing them really hard if you try to push them over something like 1.35 volts. The important thing to note is that the high side FETs, their current rating is at 10% duty cycle, and 10% duty cycle doesn't, that's their burst current throughput. The 10% duty cycle isn't really enough to even do 1.2 volts. So while in theory, if you manage to run them at 10% duty cycle, you could push 70 amps through them. You're not going to run them at 10% duty cycle if you're pushing anything above 1.2 volts, and so they derate even harder. Really, you're looking at around 40-50 amps at reasonable temperatures. So in total, you can actually only push through the VRM, say 200 amps, unless you're like chilling the VRM or something, because otherwise, it's just going to be ridiculously hot, and that's going to cause problems. So really don't push this VRM above 1.35 volts, because your high side will almost certainly burn up. So yeah, and actually 1.35 volts should be doable with software voltage control. So so volt modding this card is kind of not very useful, unless of course the NCPA 1022 is in control of the memory voltage, which I'm not sure, because I can't find any other voltage controllers on this PCB because the photo isn't quite high enough res for me to identify anything actually, except for the MOSFETs and the main voltage controllers, and even those are illegible except for their orientation. So let's actually cover what kinds of mods you can easily do on the NCP 8122. So the 8122 does have a current sensing pin, single pin current sensing. Now it does have per phase current sensing as well, but you can disable the main power sensing by just cutting pin 46 and pin 20. So 46 is core voltage, power draw, and 20 is the other voltage that this is controlling. Again, I don't know what voltage that might be. It's probably auxiliary, but it could also be memory voltage. So pin 20 is located over, so that's 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So that's your second voltage controlled by this thing, and core voltage is going to be, so that's 52, 52, 51, 50, 49, 48, 47, 46, this one right here. Hence your core voltage control pin. You need to measure the resistance from that to ground, and that will probably come up with 2 mega ohms, and in that case you need to use a 20 kilo ohm potentiometer, because this is the same voltage controller that you use on that you'll see AMD use on a 7790 and a 260X, and for some reason that pin has a ridiculously high resistance to ground. But when you actually want to skew it, you use a really relatively low resistance potentiometer relative to how high resistance. Like, this is one voltage controller, which is like the exception to the general rule where your potentiometer is higher resistance than the resistance between the pin and ground. So yeah, This one you really you'll probably be pulling it to ground through a 20k ohm, but if you have software voltage control, I just recommend not messing with it at all. Um, oh wait, no, this is current, isn't it? Oops. Sorry, people, I'm tired. Well, I just told you how to do the volt mod pin, and the volt mod pin is located here. So that's core voltage. Green one is current. So this one's current sensing. So you cut that one and you have no power draw. So PWR, so that one's power. And that one's volts. So this one, this red one is volts, and this one's also power. Oops, whatever. Um, and then right next to it, you got, well, actually not right next to it. And then over here, you got your other voltage. So that one's also volts. And that would be probably auxiliary. And again, that voltage is completely useless when overclocking. Well, not completely, but mostly useless. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. Yeah, and on the back of the PCB, the voltage controller is located. I'm gonna still show you where it is. So the voltage controller on the back of the PCB is right here, and the same pin mods apply. Yeah, and just so you know, these chips right here, that is actually a BIOS chip, and this one is also a BIOS chip. And on the reverse side of the PCB, yeah, this one, well, actually no, reverse side of the PCB, this one's also BIOS, and this one's BIOS. And you can tell they're BIOS because the GPU has dual BIOS functionality, and there's two of these exactly on the opposite side of the PCB in both cases. So those are BIOS chips. So don't bother checking those for if they're voltage controllers or not. They're certainly not voltage controllers. Um, what could be a voltage controller for memory? I have no idea. This could maybe be a memory, but it could also be a fan controller. So yeah, this card is a pain. If you have one and you want to get memory voltage control, you're going to have to do a lot of searching, unless the NCPA 81022 is your memory voltage controller, which I really, really doubt it would be, because every time the NCPA 81022 was used on a card, it was controlling auxiliary and core voltage. So yeah. So that's really all there is to say about the R9295X2. I mean, it's an insane PCB for a dual GPU card. I mean, you still have a lot of power available. It's not nearly as powerful as a 290X, but then again, uh, you got to keep this thing somewhat reasonably sized. And as you can clearly see, AMD have done their absolute freaking best to cram uh, everything onto one PCB here. Um, so yeah, it's a really great PCB. And actually, interesting thing to note, um, you do notice that this only has two 8 pins, right? And yet this card is rated to have a 500 watt TDP. I'm gonna explain. I'm gonna be doing a video on like 8 pins and 6 pins and the differences between them power-wise pretty soon. And basically, just based on the 295X2's power draw, you can expect any 8-pin ever made to, allow almost 200 watts of power through it, even more. Most of them can do 250 watts, which is why you can actually overclock this thing and not burn your house down. Because the PCIe spec for these is really, really conservative. But like 8 pins and the cabling that an 8 pin is made up of would allow you to do 360 watts. The connector itself can't do that much. The connector can usually, like, depending on what quality they are, can either do 300 or just around 200 to 250 watts. So yeah, that's how this thing can actually work with only two 8 pins, because really it should have like two 8 pins and a 6 pin, or three 8 pins in total, because yeah, those VRMs could certainly deliver enough current to burn out two 8 pins if they only actually did 150 watts. And actually, the card's power draw is completely insane. So yeah, that's that for this video. My motherboard review will be up soon of the 990FX-Gaming. That will be up on the blog really, really soon. I didn't manage to finish it yesterday because I ran into some issues in testing, and then I got over them, and that'll be all in the review. You'll get to read about that. Um, that's actually going to be the longest review I've ever made uh, on the blog. So it should be super detailed and should be super great. In other news, I'm an idiot and I failed to pick up. I failed to uh, pick up my LN2 delivery yesterday, so I don't have any LN2 for another 3 weeks. I'm an idiot. And there's another problem. I thought I would go home in the 3 weeks, but now I'm like, I really want to pick up my LN2, so I don't really want to leave. Well, go home, go back to the Czech Republic to visit my parents because my mom's just going crazy of, me being completely alone for basically a year now. Um, yeah, so that's great. But at least the RX 480 is launching soon, so we got that to look forward to. Well, if you liked the video, like and share it. Definitely share it. Everybody needs to be enlightened about GPU VRMs. And subscribe if you're not subscribed already. And do please consider donating, because if you donate, then I don't have to keep telling you that I don't know which voltage is which, because I could actually afford the GPUs and like do all the measurements necessary to do full VRM like PCB breakdowns. That's that, isn't it? Yeah. See you next time. And actually, for next time, drop which GPU you would like to see on the next PCB breakdown video down in the comments below. I hope to put out one more PCB breakdown video before the RX 480 launches, and then it'll be just a pile of RX 480 content as I absolutely murder that card. So yeah, see you next time.